Wendell was a panhandler near my college. I always gave him my change when I had extra. Usually I keep a hard rule not to give money to individuals, because I like to give it to known local charities instead, where I can be sure the money is going to a specific cause. This one panhandler, though, he always sang opera music, quite beautifully in fact, all things considered. Even though it was clear he was begging for money due to poverty and homelessness, not busking for tips, I always thought it was admirable that he was trying to perform a service in exchange for the money, and I don't like coins anyway, so I always gave him what I could. It wasn't much, just barely $1 each time. I would occasionally strike up conversations with Wendell, even if I didn't have any money for him. He liked to make students laugh with funny impressions or jokes. He was a bit older. I'm an undergrad. He was probably in his 40s or 50s. So we'd mostly have quick chats about the news or the weather or whatever. Nothing ever too deep. Sometimes, though, he'd randomly share something so intimate that I'd feel obligated to reciprocate with at least something a little superficially personal. He'd blurt out that he almost went to college on a baseball scholarship, but drugs ruined everything for him. Things like that. I'd just say, "Oh wow, sorry to hear that. I play volleyball, not for a scholarship though. I'll see you around, okay?" Once Wendell called me over while I was walking with the professor/my advisor. I didn't want to be rude, so I went over just to say a quick hello and introduced my advisor. As we walked away, my advisor was pretty clearly horrified and asked why Wendell knew me by name. I explained our strange little friendship. He said the homeless in this city weren't like the homeless in my smaller town back home. I figured he was just being elitist, and I think he could tell I hadn't taken him seriously, because after we dropped the subject just before I left, he reiterated that I shouldn't forge friendships with the homeless population in this city, or give them money because the chronically homeless tended to have criminal or addictive histories. I was very surprised because this particular advisor was usually pretty progressive and very compassionate. I tried to appeal to him with, "Wendell is a victim of a post-capitalist society," all the other things I had learned in his very own classes, but he wasn't having any of it. Basically saying however Wendell became chronically homeless, now he was, and I should act accordingly. So my professor strongly implored me to not continue even talking to Wendell at all. I kind of shook my head thinking, okay. If anything, I felt fortified by the warning, like it was a confirmation that I was a radical, doing the right thing, leading a new path and breaking down barriers, bettering society. I got closer to Wendell and shared more about my life with him. But the very next time I talked to Wendell, he seemed really irritable and distant. I wasn't quite sure why. That is, until he said, "So, your boyfriend? You two live together, or what?" I had no idea what he was talking about. "What boyfriend?" "The guy I met from yesterday you were walking down the street with." I laughed, explaining that it wasn't my boyfriend. It was just my academic advisor. All of a sudden, he wasn't so irritable anymore. He was as chatty as he'd ever been. I probably should have taken that as a red flag, but I didn't think about Wendell much at all then. I only saw him once or twice a week, and only for a few minutes at a time even then. It was around then that Wendell started bringing me gifts. I'd pass him. He'd have a flower for me, or a metal machine piece. I never refused because I figured it was a means of preserving his dignity when accepting the money, like with his opera singing. One of my roommates did remark on the flower once, and when I explained, she told me that she thought it was weird. I thought she was also just being elitist and that I was enlightened, superior to her neoliberal paranoia. I mean, come on, it's just a flower. My advisor clocked all this, so brought it up with me again a while later, saying he was worried I was being manipulated. I tried to tell him about Wendell's opera singing and impressions, and how he even almost went to college, but then I remembered the reason he lost his baseball scholarship and I stopped short. Looking at it through that lens kind of made me reconsider the whole thing. I thought about what my professor had said. Sparing the details, we did talk for half an hour, and I finally connected the dots that Wendell did have a history of drug use. He did sometimes mention how a previous girlfriend overreacting to something he'd done had derailed his life because of drugs. I decided at that point that maybe I should think about distancing myself a little more seriously. Shortly after, though, the pandemic hit and classes went virtual, so to save on rent, I went home to my parents' house, still in the state but not near the campus at all. About 3 minutes into being home, I was watching a friend's Insta story when I heard Wendell singing opera in the background. I thought to myself, oh, I forgot all about him. I hope he's doing alright. And that was that. I kept on watching the different stories. Later that night, though, something about the story kind of stuck in my gut. It had popped into my mind a few times subconsciously, and I'd ignored it, but it kept coming back, so I decided to go and watch the video again. And that's when I realized my friend's video wasn't from our college town. It was from my much smaller hometown, which is nowhere near my college. That freaked me out more than a little, but I figured everyone moved around when the pandemic hit. My town isn't that small. It certainly isn't that far from the college. It must just be a coincidence. I really wanted to mention it to my parents, but they had always warned me against talking to homeless people, besides the "can I buy you a meal" type stuff. I felt too embarrassed to explain the situation to them, especially since it was probably a coincidence. I would sound so conceited if I were to say, he definitely followed me because aren't I just so great that he's probably obsessed with me? We have a type 1 diabetic in the family, so we all took quarantining very seriously. I figured, I'll never see him anyways. I'm never gonna go out anytime soon, so it doesn't matter where he is. And nothing happened. Well, one thing. A girl from my high school who also ended up at my college called me, and in summary said, "This is going to sound really weird, but I feel like I should say something to you. I was downtown and this beggar asked me about you. Like, specifically, you. He knew you were on club volleyball. He knew about your major. I didn't tell him anything, but I thought it was weird, so I thought I should let you know." I was pretty alarmed at first because how would he know I know this girl? We talked a little bit more though, and I learned she'd been wearing a sweatshirt from our college. I thought about it and decided he probably saw that sweatshirt, figured she might know me from college since we were both from this town, and was just trying to find out how I was doing. I thought it was sweet, a little weird, but he was weird too, and that was part of his charm. I thanked her, but told her not to worry about it. Besides, I was gonna leave town soon anyways. I had decided to go back and live near campus. It was just impossible to get all my coursework done with my whole family around all day. So I moved back to campus a while later. Didn't think about Wendell at all, until I saw him back on the same corner, just a week after I returned to campus. Okay, even I knew at that time that something was wrong. I stopped giving him money altogether, stopped talking to him, but I was so humiliated by how high and mighty I had been, insisting that nothing was wrong and everyone else was being paranoid and elitist, that I decided not to tell anyone what I had noticed. At this point, I was barely leaving my apartment, never going on campus, and his usual spot was right by there. I felt bad about potentially hurting his feelings or reading too far into the situation, but I figured with this he'd get the message, and it was better safe than sorry. After finals, I decided to visit my brother, in a different state. His roommate had moved home, leaving an extra bed, so I drove up to his place to celebrate the end of the year and just get away from it all. About the 9th day in, I was woken up way earlier than usual. When my brother isn't working or in school, he sleeps until noon, to the sound of my brother talking to the door. I got up to see what was going on, because we weren't seeing anyone, staying totally quarantined. His state was being hit extra hard. My brother was talking politely to someone outside through a crack in the door, but when he turned to look at me, he looked royally pissed. He turned back outside and said, "Hold on here. Close the door," despite what the other guy was protesting. I couldn't hear exactly what he said, though. My brother immediately got in my face and whisper yelling said, "Mom and Dad are gonna kill you." I had no idea what he was talking about, but my first thought was that the cops had come to arrest me for something. It was the only logical thought I could generate first thing in the morning after just waking up. The only thing I could imagine being arrested for was my fake ID, which I only ever used to get into concerts, obviously none lately, so I was really in shock. My brother was still going, though, as best as I can remember, because I was panicked at this point. He was saying, "And I'm gonna kill you. This is so not cool. You didn't even ask. I wouldn't have said yes anyways, but you didn't even think to ask?" I realized that didn't align with being arrested. "What are you talking about? You're dating a 40-year-old guy? Older, 45 maybe. Of all the people out there, I mean, Jesus. Dad's gonna kill you and then have a heart attack and die, which will kill Mom. And you invited him to my house while we're supposed to be social distanced? You two can go to a hotel or something, because he sure as hell isn't coming in here. I wasn't a dick to him out of respect for you, but if he doesn't leave now, that's gonna change real fast." I had no idea what he was talking about. None. I hadn't connected any of the pieces yet, because you gotta remember, Wendell was such a small part of my life until this point. I almost never saw him or thought about him for quite a while. My world had been turned upside down by a pandemic in the preceding few months. It was just some background noise. Faint background noise, compared to all the other things going on in my life. I just said the first thing that came to my mind. "Dude, I don't know why you're getting so mad at me. I don't have a boyfriend, and I don't know what you're talking about. Obviously, someone's got the wrong house." My brother looked like he was ready to rip my face off. "We're adults. Come on, don't fucking lie to me. I'm not Mom and Dad. We can't deal with this if you're gonna lie to my face." I repeated that I wasn't lying. I think he could tell from my expression and tone that I was genuinely being serious. Now he was confused, and as irritated as I was. He didn't just vaguely say he was here for his girlfriend. He used your name, rattled off a ton of very exact info. I think he said he said you guys had a fight, and he was here to work things out. I'd been looking for a boyfriend for a long time, so I was half thinking, maybe dreams do come true. Might as well see who it is. But I was also starting to feel a bit sick, in the pit of my stomach, because it would be one thing if this happened on campus or back home, but I had completely changed states. My brother moved to this state for school, and I didn't know anyone here but him and his friends. So I finally did the obvious thing, and looked out through the peephole. I almost didn't recognize him at all at first, because he had showered, shaved, and changed into clean clothes for the first time since I'd known him. But sure as shit, it was Wendell standing on my brother's doorstep, hundreds of miles from his original corner. I was so scared I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding like I was slipping under deep water with my legs tied. I just backed away from the door and sat down on the couch and tried to collect myself. My brother thought this was my affirming that there really was some secret older boyfriend who had just made himself known, so it took a minute for him to cut off his ranting. Finally, he realized I was tearing up. He sat down, calmed down, and apologized, said we'd figure it out. I whispered, still out of breath, "You don't understand. He followed me here." My brother still didn't get it. "What? You didn't want him to come here? What was your fight about?" Still thinking the man was my boyfriend. I managed to repress my panic enough to explain the broad strokes to him, but I don't think he fully grasped how creepy it was in the moment. "You're shitting me. That's hilarious. I'll take care of this." He went to the door and called from behind it. "Yo, I just checked. She's not here. Must have packed out this morning. You should do the same. I'm taking the social distancing stuff real serious, you know." He turned around and winked at me. That's when, as my brother says when he tells this story, it got real. Wendell said through the door, "You're lying. I heard her in there. And tell her I'm sorry. I don't know why she's been avoiding me, but I got cleaned up just for her. I'll take her anywhere she wants to go. And tell her that. Tell her and don't lie. I'll know if you lie." That rubbed my brother the wrong way. "Bro, you're not taking her anywhere. Get off my deck before we have a problem here." Wendell sounded like he was walking away, but instead he was just going over to the window. I saw him staring in. He looked different than I'd ever seen him, even a few seconds earlier when I'd glanced through the peephole. His clothes were clean, but they didn't fit or match at all. His eyes completely bugged out of his head. White stuff caked on the corners of his mouth I hadn't noticed at first. Shaking, just kind of disconnected from reality. He started banging on the window, shouting, "That's my girlfriend. You can't keep her in there, you little bitch ass. Let her out. Let her out." I couldn't tell if it was meant as a threat or a reassurance. I was so scared. I was too scared to run or even move. I think my brother was almost as surprised by the sudden outburst. He was rolling up his sleeves like he was preparing to go out there and fight. I was trying to make my voice work to beg him not to, but I was so anxious, scared, embarrassed, and sad that I had missed all the signs leading up to this, all the opportunities to prevent it, that our friendship was never the wholesome thing I thought it was. Of course, that's something I had already begun to grapple with before this day. I had so many thoughts swirling in my head, fear being chief among them. All I could do was scream. Not words, just a scream. I covered my ears to drown the whole situation out. Before my brother could charge out the door, he was pretty athletic, but I don't think he'd ever been in a physical fight in his life. Wendell punched through the window. Nothing actually happened when he punched through, and there was an eerie moment of silence where nobody moved. I think I was even so startled I stopped screaming. When he pulled his hand back, though, all hell broke loose. A fair amount of blood started spurting out when he pulled his hand back through the glass. The things he was shouting started to make even less sense, along the lines of, "Look what you did to me. This is a test. I told you I couldn't be stopped." And the look in his eyes got even more distant. I think the sight of the blood, which has always made my brother really squeamish, made him realize this was real. He finally yelled, "Damn, call 911!" He leaned against the door which Wendell was now repeatedly charging into, even though he was nowhere near close to breaking it down. I don't even remember making the call, but apparently I did, because within 10 minutes the police arrested Wendell without resistance. He kept trying to tell them his girlfriend was trapped in the house. He'd come all this way to save her. My poor brother was even momentarily handcuffed and had to explain that he hadn't, in fact, taken me hostage. Probably one of the most haunting memories of the whole event is, as they carted Wendell away for arrest, he started to sing his opera music. I've learned a lot of important common sense and life lessons from this saga, but most of all, Wendell, let's never meet. I was born and raised in South Carolina. It was always tough living there because I'm an African American lady. My family and I grew up in an upper middle class neighborhood. Both my parents are immigrants who worked very hard to give my siblings and I a good life. So it was a Saturday evening when my parents decided to go out on a date. I was 14 at the time, and they trusted that I would be able to babysit my little brother and sister. I'd done this whole thing a million times before, so I wasn't worried at all. They left the house at around 8 and promised to be back no later than 11 p.m. At first, everything seemed perfectly fine. My brother was in the first living room playing on his Xbox. I was on the couch near him, using my phone, and my sister was upstairs in our room, messing away with her tablet. The layout of the house was something like this. You open the front door, and immediately to your right you have the first living room. That leads into a dining room, which leads into the kitchen. The kitchen is an open space, and leads into the second living room. From there you can access the backyard and the door to the garage. On the left of the front door, you can go up the stairs to our bedrooms. On one side of the hall you have my sister and I's room, and a bathroom, and on the other you have the master bedroom and my brother's room. Anyway, I'm just sitting on the couch with my brother, when I suddenly hear the garage door being opened. It was only around 9 p.m., and I knew my parents would never come back so early. I got up to meet them at the door and see why they had come back. Whenever they leave, I always make sure the door from the garage is locked, so I usually have to let them in. I walked right up to the door, but just as I was about to open it, I suddenly stopped. I felt anxious for whatever reason and didn't want to open the door until I confirmed it was them. I could see the doorknob wiggling violently. I got scared and stepped back. I called out in a nervous voice, "Mom?" No response. "Dad, is that you? Stop messing around." Nothing. I started to get really scared. "Dad, if this is you, please say something. I'm getting scared." After I said this, the wiggling got far more violent. It looked like the door was going to burst open at any moment. By this point, my brother had stopped playing his game and ran into the kitchen. Fearing for our lives, I ran into the kitchen as well and grabbed one of the biggest knives we had. I took my brother's hand and ran upstairs. There I grabbed my sister and ran into my brother's room. By now, I had heard the door violently burst open. I locked the door to the room and hid my siblings in the closet, while I pushed the dresser in front of the door to barricade it. After I did, I sat on his bed and called the cops right away. The operator got all of my details and said the cops would be there in 5 minutes. As I sat on the bed, I felt absolutely terrified and helpless. My mind was completely blank until I heard the running coming up the stairs. The light sobbing in the closet from my siblings turned into fearful screams. I had my back against the wall, shaking as I held the knife out in front of me with nervousness. I heard them bust through each door. Eventually, they got to the end of the hall, where my brother's room was. They tried to open the door. They got pissed and started banging and yelling at us to open up. I could tell by the voice that this was a man. Eventually, he was able to bust the lock and slide the door open just slightly. We locked eyes as he tried to make it past my makeshift barricade. I got a good look at his face and features. He couldn't have been more than 5'10" and had a stocky build and a very deep voice. He had, at least to me, very obviously gotten cosmetic surgery. His face looked incredibly artificial. His skin had an unnatural smoothness to it. He had these grossly big lips, and his eyes seemed to be just a little too big for his face. I was on the verge of tears, so I just yelled out, "Don't come any closer! The police are already on their way!" That seemed to stop him dead in his tracks. He took one last look back at me before he ran down the stairs and out the front door. I ran to the closet to check on my siblings and see if they were both all right. They were pretty scared, but other than that, they were just fine, thankfully. After about a minute later, the police finally pulled up to my house. The officer came in and yelled to see if we were all right. I remember being taken to the station with my siblings and calling my parents on the way too. We filed a report, but nothing ever came out of it. I remember being so angry. There couldn't be that many people who looked like that in South Carolina. How hard was it to find someone who left the crime scene just within minutes before them arriving? This happened about 6 years ago. For a little info about myself, I'm a 23-year-old female, and I'm also very small. I'm only 4'11", and I weigh 95 pounds soaking wet. No, I don't have an eating disorder either. My 11th grade year of high school is when this event took place. It was within the first 2 weeks of school, and I was a bus rider. We had this new bus driver. Me being a very social person, I always thanked him for his services and was always super nice to him. I believe that's where I messed up. One day after school, I was riding the bus. I was always one of the first to be dropped off, so when I realized I had been on the bus for an extra 10 minutes, I was a little curious. I chalked it up to the fact that bus routes normally get changed all the time. At this point, I had been on the bus for about 30 minutes, and there were 2 kids left, an old friend of mine and, of course, myself. This friend of mine lived in a very remote location, and there was absolutely no cell service out there, so when we dropped her off, I couldn't call my parents to let them know what was happening. My friend tried really hard to convince me to get off at her stop. Little did I know I should have listened. As we were leaving this area, the bus driver pulled into a cemetery. He told me to look out my window, and when I did, I saw a torn to shreds baby deer. My whole body went into shutdown mode. I didn't know how to react. My initial reaction was to pull out my phone and call my parents when I suddenly remembered that I had no signal. I got up and ran to the back of the bus, and keep in mind I was the only kid now. We sat by the deer for a good 10 minutes. The whole time I'm in the back, and my blood was absolutely boiling. It took everything in me not to run off that bus and look for help. When we started to leave, the driver just started talking about random things. How he loves his wife, loves his new job as a bus driver. The whole time he was barely paying attention to the road. I got on my phone and went to Google Maps. Thank God they work even without service. I realized my house was 15 minutes from where we were, and I was super excited to be going home soon. Boy, was I wrong. This jackass took a ton of back roads and kept talking to me. The whole time I'm sitting in silence, still with no service on my cell phone. About 20 minutes later, I started to see landmarks that were around my neighborhood. I looked down and there's service on my phone finally. I immediately called my dad, but he didn't answer. Not even 2 minutes later though, we pull into my neighborhood and he suddenly drops me off at my house. I wanted to run, but for some reason, I just stood in my yard and stared at him frozen in fear. Eventually he slowly pulled off, and when he did I took off running into my house. My parents were in the room, freaking out about where I was. My mom started grilling me about where I was and what I was doing. I get out of school at 2:15, and I didn't get home until around 4:45-ish. On a normal day, I would get home at around 2:30, so my mom was very upset. My dad's phone was dead because he had tried so many times to call me. I began to cry and tell them everything that had happened. My dad was furious, called my school and used my mom's phone to record the whole conversation between my dad, the principal, and myself. Thankfully, the principal was just as extremely pissed off about what had taken place as my dad was. My mother was just cuddling me, asking me if I was okay and if the man had done anything else. I didn't go back to school for about 2 days. There was no formal investigation. The school handled it all themselves. The bus driver denied everything, but when they checked the camera footage, the camera happened to be covered by a sticker or something of the sort. Thankfully, because of this, nobody believed the bus driver at all, and he was immediately fired. I'd never rode the bus since. I know this isn't as creepy as most stories, but it's still the most bone-chilling experience I've ever had. There are tons of stories on social media of women fearing for their lives in stores. I can't speak to the validity of their stories, but I can tell you mine. I was working a job that sometimes had late hours, and I would blow off steam in my local Walmart afterwards, either to pick up groceries or just walk around to wind down before bed. When I pulled up to the parking lot, there were these 2 men hanging out in the almost deserted lot. I sat in my car for a minute because they scared me somewhat. I almost didn't go in. That's how much of a bad, creepy vibe they were oozing. They were just sitting on the hood. It wasn't until 2 other people showed up that I decided I felt safe enough to walk in with the 2 new people, and the other 2 men followed close behind. I did my shopping as usual across the store until I realized that I was being followed. The 2 men waiting outside previously were suddenly in my eye line every time I looked up. They were across from me in makeup. They were down the aisle in house goods, down the aisle from me in grocery. I decided I would test them to see if they were following me. I walked to my left, and one of the men ended up looking at bathing suits while he was watching me. That was it. There was no denying now. As I made my way towards the front to check out, I saw one of the men sprint out the front door ahead of me. As I checked out my items, the second made his way out the door as well. That's the moment when I decided that this was really going to happen if I went out those doors. Those men were going to take me, so I decided to get an escort. It took me a long time to find someone working. It was already after 12 a.m., and most people were in the back stocking up. When I finally did, though, I told them I didn't feel safe and that these men had been following me. I asked him politely for an escort. In that time, the second men came back into the store to see what was taking me so long. The manager said they'd been hanging out in the lot all day. The manager thankfully found a man to walk me out, and what I saw when we walked out will stay with me forever. The first man was crouched down, just off to the right of the doors, as if he were going to jump someone from behind. When I saw his face, he knew that I knew what he was doing. He ran to his car, called his buddy. He got on the phone real quick, and went and sat in his car while I was escorted. I called the police as I drove away. I know I should have done it inside the store. It's a big regret that I have to this day. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I got a big update for you guys today. It seems like the Teespring store is finally online, so if everything's going well, you should probably be able to see all of the new merchandise on the merchandise shelf below the video. I got some mugs, I got some phone cases, and I got some t-shirts for y'all with the designs on them. All of the shirt designs are under one thing, so if you click on the sweatshirts, it should take you to a page where you can order a different variety of different kinds of shirts. So I just wanted to let you guys know about that. Let me know what you guys think, if it looks good, the pricing, everything. So look forward to that. As always, if you guys liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a story that you'd like me to read, or you have a story that you'd like to send in yourself, please be sure to check the description of the video below, as it contains all of the links to my social media, including my Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, and Twitch accounts. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in, and what type of story it is, if it does have a type. Also, if you decide to send in a story, please be sure to properly format it into separate paragraphs. Thank you guys very much for that. If you guys are curious about the music used at all in this video, it's all listed in the description below, in the order of which it appears in, with links to all of the artists as well. So if you enjoy their work, please be sure to check it out and support them. Speaking of artists, as always, my friend Alan is doing the thumbnails for the videos now, so I have links to all of his art pages in the description as well. So if you like his art and you appreciate it a lot, please be sure to check out his pages and go support him, because he does some really great stuff. I think that's all for today, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.